Information radio is AM 1420 KTOE Mankato and FM 102.7 K274AL Mankato.
Good afternoon. We welcome you to a special edition of Talk of the Town, and my thanks to Pete Steiner for offering his showtime for today's special show. It's the KTOE State House 19A Candidate Forum. My name is Wendy Wilde, and Talk of the Town is brought to you by
Wendy Wilde,
Cato
and
Glass.
we
have in studio with us today, live in studio, the three candidates for the State House 19A special election, which is coming up this Tuesday. And alphabetically, our candidates are Tim Gieseke with the Independence Party, Clark Johnson with the DFL, and Alan Quist, who's endorsed by the Republican Party. And before the show, we already chose the order that the first question will be answered by each of the candidates. And before we move on to that first question, our thanks to our sponsors for the candidate forum today. S&S Thermodynamics, where hot and cold get along. Nicollet County Bank, a small-town community bank, but we're big on you, and by Patrick's on 3rd in St. Peter. And candidates, I wish we had time to chit-chat. We don't. We're going to get right down to business here. Our first question will be asked by North Mankato Mayor Mark Dean.
Recognizing you have been endorsed by a party, how will you work across party lines on behalf of all the citizens of District 19A to move the local and state interests forward? Please give an example of your previous experience in successful compromise.
And our first answer, our first response will come from Independence Party candidate Tim Gieseke.
Thank you. Working across party lines is going to be a necessity as we always look at these complex issues of health, education, and environment. In my professional work, I do run a consulting business that deals with governance and policy issues and work at a national level, roundtable of ag, environment, forestry people. And so that context I am very comfortable with in looking for compromise and solutions. Now, at the capital level, I think the discussion has to actually move into a new context itself. And I think we have some promising movements there. There's a House Redesign Caucus, a bipartisan caucus that started in 2010 and reemerged here again this session. And it's really to look at how the governance of delivering services can be changed to streamline, to reduce transaction costs and outcomes. And it will be very interesting to see how that caucus moves forward in a bipartisan way. And if I'm elected, definitely a tripartisan way if I could be involved in that. Now, at the local level, the counties, Association of Minnesota Counties has also really initiated this. And the exact acronym, I believe it's the MAGIC Act, and it's an accountability framework on how state and county governments can be aligned to deliver the services that many counties are responsible for. So working together under the context we have now, where we have fighting over funding on specific budget issues, is very contentious, and we have both sides with their pet programs, and that's and we seesaw back and forth between the different sessions as the elections occur. I think that for us to get work done in St. Paul, we need to look at a new context, a new governance structure, and I think the House Redesign Caucus and the MAGIC Act are two places that we can get some grassroots and state support to move that forward.
Thank you, Mr. Gieseke. And our second answer will come from our second response from Republican candidate Alan Quist. Oh, I'm sorry. I got this backwards. I'm going to correct that. Our second response comes from the DFL candidate, Clark Johnson. Sorry, Clark.
My approach to this question is that by nature I seek compromise, that we seek common ground in the public sphere. One of the beauties of a legislative process is basically people come with a set of ideas, and hopefully we all listen to our constituents. We learn, we chat about it, we talk about it, we debate it, we disagree, but we seek common ground that's what's for the best of Minnesota. We can do that when we're open to possibilities and we're open to new ideas. I think one of the things that has hamstrung the legislature in the last several years is a commitment to no new taxes, has limited the approach on the budget. And therefore, what's called a balanced approach was not really a balanced approach because it only looked at, it failed to look at the revenue side, only looked at the spending side. I will seek to both cut spending where appropriate, but also recognizing that we need new revenues in the overriding larger issue of solving the budget issue. I like to use criteria when making a decision. And again, getting to the budget issue, I've been pretty clear on the criteria I want to use. And those are the criteria I'm using are stability, fair taxation, and I'll look towards the future, a future orientation, trying to find a budget that will not only solve this biennium's challenge, but where we can look forward to a balanced budget or not having a deficit in the next biennium. I think those are really basic criteria that other legislators, regardless of party, can agree to. And then the debate comes down to how we can best do that. And that's where if we're open to new ideas and we're open to different possibilities, I think we can come to a conclusion or a consensus and achieve that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And our third response now will come from the Republican candidate, Alan Quist.
Well, Wendy, thank you very much. And Kent, Mark, thank you very much for the good question. As you know, I was in the legislature 3 terms in the 80s, and if elected, I'll come in with 3-term seniority and just a lot of experience. And my record in the legislature in the 80s was one of being extremely bipartisan, and I will insist that good legislation is almost always bipartisan. In 1985, for instance, I was author of the bill that created Minnesota's Department of Jobs and Training. It discontinued a directionless department that was focused on just giving people money rather than helping them become self-sufficient. So I came in with that proposal. I went to the Perpich administration. Perpich was a member of the Democratic Party, asked for their assistance, and they said, wonderful, let's work together. And then I went to the Senate, which was controlled by the Democratic Party, and they said the same thing, wonderful, let's work together. So I was the prime mover behind the bill that changed the entire direction of state government with regards to its welfare programs. And it changed it in the direction of helping people become self-sufficient by getting job skills. Totally bipartisan. And I have a picture of myself with Governor Perpich, Democrat, signing this really landmark bill. I will take the same skill into the legislature right now. And there are a couple areas that really demand leadership in a bipartisan way. One has to do with the health care exchanges because the insurance tab for the average middle-class family of 4, the IRS says by 2016 is going to be $20,000 a year. And so we're pricing the middle class out of insurance. I think I can get bipartisan support to correct that. We also have a quagmire of wasted money in the Medicaid program. And I think with some leadership, I think I can get bipartisan support to get that money flowing in the right direction.
Thank you so much. We'll continue with our next question in a moment. You're listening to KTOE's State House 19A Candidate Forum on Talk of the Town. And I'd like to say thank you to Dwayne McGaw, who's KTOE's program director, helping us with all the technical side of the show, and Jeff Lang, our station's promotions director, who is videotaping today's forum. And we will put it up on the KTOE.com website just ASAP so that you can, if you didn't have time to listen through or pay as much attention, you'll be able to do that. Our next question for our candidates for the State House 19A seat, and by the way, that special election coming up this Tuesday. Our next question is by Kent Gieseke, who's farm management analyst at Minstar Bank and the author of Focus on Ag.
The state of Minnesota is considering potential regulations that will affect farmers related to water quality, nutrient management, and livestock production. What do you feel is the appropriate balance between regulation and economic growth as it relates to the state's agriculture industry?
And our thanks to Kent Gieseke for that question. And our first response will come from DFL candidate Clark Johnson.
I work in public higher education, and I work with a lot of policies and rules related to that. And I work in an industry that sometimes I think is overregulated, and so I'm a little wary of regulation. I should also mention that I grew up in North Dakota and was raised there, and just as a North Dakotan, I'm wary of regulation. I have a natural bias to be careful about it. But this is a complex society. And there's a lot going on, and we know that we need regulations to make sure that various interests are protected, the environment's protected, people are protected. I think the key with regulation in the agricultural industry is that it be science-based. That if the science says that regulation will improve the situation, recognizes a problem, and recognizes that regulation can improve the situation, that's the first test of the regulation. I think the second test for regulations on the ag industry are that it be tested in the countryside. That before we go willy-nilly and apply a broad regulation, that we make sure that it can work in the individual situations in the countryside. So science-based regulation that's been tested may make sense when there's an established need for that. And that's how a modern society works. It's a matter of working with the agricultural industry, but also recognizing the needs of the environment and the needs of other factors to assure that we have regulation that does provide for economic growth.
Very good, thank you. And our next response will come from GOP candidate Alan Quist.
Thank you, and Kent, thank you for the excellent question. As I think you know, Kent, I'm an individual that makes his living on the farm, and together with my son Nathan, we own and operate about 800 acres of cropland in Nicollet County. And by the way, I grew up on a dairy farm, and my dad used to farm me out to the other dairy farmers in the summer. And so I ran a bunch of dairy farms when the farmers were on vacation. And then I worked my way through college and grad school by raising hogs. And so I know the livestock industry. I know the dairy industry. I make my living in the crop industry. I am there. I know how it works. The biggest problem with regulations is they're put together by people in rooms in St. Paul or Washington, bureaucrats, if you will, who have never been there. And they don't know how it works. And what might look good on paper doesn't necessarily look good out in the field or in the hog barn. So what I bring to St. Paul is, number one, a wealth of experience, a lot of common sense, but more than anything else, a knowledge of what works and what doesn't. And when it comes to water quality, for instance, which was one of the questions that you raised, which is something I'm very, very sensitive to, as far as regulations go with water quality, one of my goals is to bring people who are policymakers on water quality out to Nicollet County, and I would love to personally show them, here's where the problems are, here's what happens when we get 8 inches of rain overnight, and here is how we can solve the problem in a reasonable way. What the people who make the regulations lack is the hands-on, I've been there, I've walked a mile in your moccasins, a point of view. And that's what I bring, and that's what will make regulations beneficial as opposed to being counterproductive.
Thank you. And our third response to this question comes from Independence Party candidate Tim Gieseke.
Thank you, and thank you, Kent, for the question. Most of the last 20 years, I've actually been involved with this issue quite closely as a farmer since 1996. I did get a master's degree in environmental sciences from Mankato, and worked with local government on the conservation district, and worked on farm policy in the early 2000s, and then began my business, Ag Resource Strategies, in 2007, and really that evolution of my career has been to how do we integrate production and natural resource management. And one of my first clients with the as a business was with the Minnesota milk producers, and they say we produce a good quality milk product, and we're good stewards of the land. The state government isn't quite coordinating that, getting the best out of us, and so they asked me to develop a private-public partnership process to integrate the agriculture community better into the state government, and we went through a couple hundred farms with that, and looked at what's practical. That was adopted by the Minnesota Department of Ag in 2009, and my report, when I concluded the report for them in 2011, I kind of looked at what we had accomplished, and the title aptly was named "Using a Shared Governance Model to Certify Minnesota Clean Water Legacy Farms," and that's kind of where a lot of where my candidacy even evolves from, is looking at these new models of public and private partnership, bringing the practitioner into the policy and the governance of it made a lot of sense, and with that report and that work. This last January, Governor Dayton, USDA Secretary Vilsack, and EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson signed an agreement, the Ag Water Quality Certainty Program, and really my business was able to provide the foundation for that work. And now they're going through the listening session. So it's really a matter of looking at it from a broad perspective, what's good for the economic and what's good for the environmental aspects of farming, and I continue to carry that forward.
Thank you. Our third question will continue in just a moment, and we will have another show just like this tomorrow live in which we'll have different questions for the same three candidates, the candidates for the State House 19A seat that was vacated recently by Terry Morrow, who resigned, and KTOE's candidate forum continues in just a moment. And we thank you for listening today to KTOE's State House 19A Candidate Forum on KTOE's Talk of the Town. Pete Steiner graciously allowed us his time, and I thank you. My name is Wendy Wilde. Our three candidates are in studio with us live today. Alan Quist, the Republican-endorsed candidate, Clark Johnson, the DFL candidate, and Tim Gieseke, who is the endorsed candidate with the Independence Party. And this next question is one that actually I came up with, and I think it's kind of a fun question. Pretend you're in an elevator with one other person. You've got, until you reach their floor, let's say 60 seconds to get that person's vote. And call it your elevator speech. What would you say? And our first candidate to respond will be Alan Quist.
Well, Wendy, what I would say is this, that I think it's quite evident that the legislature is not off to a good start, because what the legislature is focusing on is not beneficial to the average citizen in 19A. And what I want to do is do what I can to focus the debate and the attention on things that are helpful to people here. For example, last Monday, the president comes in, launches his gun control initiative. And so what do we have this week? We've got Gun Week in the legislature. That's not helpful to the people here. And now the governor last night said he wants gay marriage and he wants higher taxes. Neither of those are constructive for the people in 19A. So what we have to do is focus on the real problems, and as places where we can reduce spending, like Medicaid, which is out of control, and places where we need to make major changes, like in the healthcare exchanges, where we're pricing the middle class out of the market. And that's what I would focus on.
Our thanks to Alan Quist. Our next respondent will be Independence Party candidate Tim Gieseke.
Yes, I would focus on, as we look at our budget, and that's a contentious issue, and we push it back and forth. But I would say I would ask for the vote, because we'll look at the business model of the state government and see how we can develop public and private partnerships. And with my experience, fairly diverse experience in the last 20 years dealing with local governments, state and federal governments, my private business and farming, as well as being in the education community, I feel that I can bring that diversity at the state capitol and begin to look at the process of delivering health care, the process of delivering education in this new economy that's growing. We're highly dependent on smart technology. We've weaved it into our lives. We need to begin to look at how government can incorporate the practitioner in policy and bring that forward as well.
Our thanks to Tim Gieseke, and our third response for the elevator speech will come from DFL candidate Clark Johnson.
I think we have a special opportunity this year to put Minnesota on a stable fiscal path. The last 10 years, we've observed a fiscal policy being regulated by a no new taxes pledge, which has resulted in the state borrowing from schools to pay for state expenses and consistently putting state expenses on the backs of local property tax owners. And what we need to do is have a stable budget, built on fair taxes, with an orientation towards the future. Once we have a stable budget, we can reinvest in education, reinvest in roads, reduce property taxes, and meet the key priorities of the state of Minnesota. As your state legislator, I will listen to you and I will learn from you. I will work hard for and with you to build a better future for Minnesota. So I would finish that speech by asking for the vote of that person I'm speaking for to be the next state representative in District 19A.
Okay, gentlemen, it's remarkable. All three of you hit every time mark. We had timed our questions to keep the show moving along, and not one of you went over time. So I thank you so much for being here. Clark Johnson, DFL candidate, thank you. Alan Quist,
Wendy,
with
you.
The GOP, and Tim Gieseke, our Independence Party candidate.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be back again tomorrow on Talk of the Town with a different set of questions, different questions from leaders in the community, as well as a question that was submitted to us by a listener. So I hope that you'll be able to join us tomorrow for a second live candidate forum on KTOE's Talk of the Town. And this KTOE State House 19A candidate forum has been brought to you by S&S Thermodynamics, where hot and cold get along. By Nicollet County Bank, a small town community bank, but we're big on you. and by Patrick's on 3rd in St. Peter. Additional thanks today for Dwayne McGaw, who is KTOE's program director and has done all the technical side of today's show, and to Jeff Lang, KTOE's promotions director. Jeff is videotaping today's and tomorrow, I believe, we're going to have Jeff Hendricks in studio, who will be videotaping the candidate forum. And both of these video forums will be put on our website. So if you have further questions about the candidates or their answers, or if you'd like to go through them again, we welcome you to check out our website. It'll take us just a little time to get that video up there, but it'll be online at KTOE.com. There was a candidate forum a little earlier this week in St. Peter. It was sponsored by the St. Peter Chamber of Commerce, the St. Peter League of Women Voters, as well as Greater Mankato Growth. And the candidates each filled out a questionnaire, and those profiles are also online at the Greater Mankato Growth website. I'm pretty sure the address is candidates.greatermankatogrowth.com, so we encourage you to check that out as well. But do join us again tomorrow on Talk of the Town for our second edition with a second new set of questions with our candidates, Alan Quist, Clark Johnson, and Tim Gieseke, live in studio on Talk of the Town. Again, thanks to Pete Steiner, and we will have some clips in our morning news tomorrow as well, so join us for that. My name is Wendy Wilde for KTOE News.